October 15th, 1993. Miguel Vargas held a shovel in his shaking hands. The man bleeding in his barn had just handed him coordinates to enough gold to feed his family for generations. "Bury this," the stranger whispered, pressing a leather pouch into Miguel's palm. "If they find me here, you never saw me. If they don't, this is yours." Miguel knew better than to ask questions. The mountains had taught him that silence kept you alive. 3 decades later, when DEA agents knocked on his door with ground-penetrating radar, Miguel learned the stranger's name, Pablo Escobar. The pouch contained more than gold. It held documents that could topple governments. The coordinates led to power. The silence had cost him everything else. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Miguel Vargas closed his eyes and let the mountain wind carry away 30 years of carefully buried memories. The DEA agents stood in his doorway like harbingers of a reckoning he'd always known would come. Agent Rodriguez held a tablet displaying thermal imaging of his property, red and yellow blobs that looked like abstract art but spelled out his doom in technicolor. "Senor Vargas, we have reason to believe there are metal objects buried on your land. Objects of significant value." Rodriguez's Spanish carried the crisp accent of Miami, not the mountains. "We'd like your permission to excavate." Miguel's weathered hands trembled as he gripped the doorframe. Behind the agents, his granddaughter Sofia played in the coffee grove, her laughter echoing off the same hills where Pablo Escobar had once bled onto his barn floor. The irony wasn't lost on him. The monster's blood had fertilized the same soil where innocence now bloomed. "I know nothing about buried objects," Miguel said, the lie tasting like ash on his tongue. Agent Morrison stepped forward, his blue eyes scanning Miguel's face with the intensity of a man trained to read deception. 3 nights in October 1993. You reported a sick cow to the veterinarian, but your neighbor says he never saw you leave your property. Strange, don't you think? They knew. Somehow, impossibly, they knew. Miguel's mind raced back to that October night when he'd found the stranger collapsed against his barn, blood seeping through expensive clothes that had no business in these mountains. The man's face had been swollen beyond recognition, but his voice, God, that voice had carried the weight of absolute authority even in desperation. "Please," the stranger had gasped, pressing the leather pouch into Miguel's palm with surprising strength. "My enemies are close. This is payment for your silence." Miguel had wanted to refuse, to turn the man away and pretend he'd never seen him. But then he'd thought of Isabella, his 15-year-old daughter, and the stories he'd heard about what happened to families who crossed the wrong people. The stranger's clothes, his gold watch, the way he spoke, everything screamed danger of the highest order. So Miguel had hidden him in the barn's secret compartment, the same space his grandfather had used to hide from conservative death squads during La Violencia. 3 nights the stranger had stayed, eating Miguel's simple food and bleeding onto his hay. On the 3rd night, as helicopters circled overhead and government soldiers combed the neighboring valleys, the stranger had grown delirious with fever. In his rambling, he'd spoken of tunnels and bribes, of judges and politicians dancing to his tune like marionettes. He'd whispered names that made Miguel's blood freeze, names of senators and police chiefs, all bought and paid for. "You want to know something funny?" The stranger had laughed bitterly. "They think I'm finished, but I've got insurance buried all over these mountains. Photos, recordings, bank records, enough evidence to burn their whole corrupt system to the ground." When Miguel had asked about the coordinates, the stranger's eyes had focused with sudden clarity. "That's not just gold, campesino. That's a death warrant for half of Bogotá. Use it wisely." By morning, the stranger was gone, vanished like smoke into the pre-dawn mist. Miguel had found only a blood-stained blanket and the lingering scent of expensive cologne mixed with desperation. Now Agent Rodriguez was speaking again, pulling Miguel back from the abyss of memory. "We know you helped him, Miguel. But here's the thing. We don't care about ancient history. We care about what he left behind." Miguel's granddaughter chose that moment to run toward the house, her small arms wrapped around a bundle of coffee cherries. She stopped short when she saw the strangers, instinctively moving behind Miguel's legs. "Abuelo," she whispered. "Who are they?" The sight of Sofia's trusting face nearly broke Miguel's resolve. She was the same age Isabella had been that October night, 15 years old and full of dreams about studying in Bogotá, dreams that could be shattered by the secrets buried beneath their feet. "Businessmen, mija," Miguel murmured, his hand finding her shoulder. "Go help your grandmother with dinner." Sofia hesitated, those intelligent eyes studying the agents with suspicion beyond her years. Children in these mountains learned early to recognize danger. Agent Morrison crouched to Sofia's eye level, his expression softening. "Beautiful property you have here. Your grandfather must work very hard to maintain it." "Sí," Sofia said proudly. "Abuelo grows the best coffee in Antioquia. Everyone says so. I bet he does." Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes as he straightened. "Mr. Vargas, perhaps we could speak privately?" Miguel felt the walls of his carefully constructed life beginning to crumble. 30 years of silence, 30 years of pretending that October night had been nothing more than a fever dream. But the leather pouch hidden beneath his bedroom floorboards proved otherwise. Photographs, documents, and enough incriminating evidence to topple Colombia's government. He'd never spent the gold, never even looked at the documents after that first terrifying glimpse. Some secrets were too dangerous to possess, but now the past had found him anyway. Sofia lingered for a heartbeat longer, her dark eyes moving between Miguel and the strangers with the intuitive wariness of mountain children. Finally, she turned toward the house, her bare feet silent on the worn stone path. Miguel watched her go, memorizing the way her cotton dress caught the afternoon breeze, the gentle swing of her braided hair. When had she grown so tall? When had her resemblance to Isabella become so heartbreakingly precise? "Your granddaughter is lovely," Agent Rodriguez observed, his tone carefully neutral. "Smart, too. I can see it in her eyes." The comment felt like a veiled threat, though Miguel couldn't be certain. Everything felt threatening now. The way Morrison's hand rested near his hip, the casual manner in which Rodriguez blocked the path to the main road, even the innocent chirping of birds in the coffee grove seemed ominous. "Sofia is planning to study medicine," Miguel said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "She has the highest marks in her class. Expensive dream, medical school." Morrison's English-accented Spanish carried an undertone Miguel couldn't quite place, especially for a coffee farmer facing foreclosure. Miguel's stomach clenched. How much did they know about his financial troubles? The bank notices he'd hidden from Carmen, the sleepless nights spent calculating and recalculating numbers that never added up to salvation. The farm that had been in his family for 4 generations was slowly slipping away, one failed payment at a time. "The mountains provide," Miguel said, echoing his grandfather's old saying. The words felt hollow now. Through the kitchen window, he could see Carmen moving about, her silver hair caught in the golden light filtering through their simple curtains. She was humming, probably that old Vallenato song she'd loved since their courtship 43 years ago. The sound drifted across the courtyard, mixing with the distant lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through coffee leaves. This was his world, small, humble, honest, a place where the rhythm of life followed the seasons, where problems were solved with hard work and prayer, where secrets stayed buried beneath decades of accumulated silence. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a manila folder, his movements deliberate. "We've been investigating the Escobar network's financial infrastructure for years, following money trails, mapping safe houses, identifying collaborators." He paused, letting the word collaborators hang heavy in the air. "Your name came up in some interesting contexts." Miguel forced his expression to remain neutral, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. "I knew nothing of such things. I was a simple farmer then, as I am now." October 15th through 18th, 1993. Morrison read from a small notebook. "You called the veterinarian about a sick cow but never brought the animal in for treatment. Your neighbor, Don Carlos, remembers seeing helicopters circling your property. Government forces were conducting a major operation in this region during those exact dates." The memories crashed over Miguel like a mountain flood. The stranger's labored breathing echoing in the barn's hidden chamber, the metallic taste of fear coating his tongue as soldiers' voices carried across the valley. Isabella's pale face, as she asked why he was acting so strange. He'd told her he was worried about the cow, the same lie he'd told Carmen, the same lie he'd been telling himself for 30 years. Many farmers have sick animals, Miguel said. Sometimes they recover on their own. Rodriguez opened the folder, revealing aerial photographs of the farm. Recent ones, Miguel realized with growing alarm. The resolution was sharp enough to show individual coffee plants, the exact placement of his small outbuildings, even the vegetable garden Carmen tended behind the house. These thermal readings show metal objects approximately 8 feet underground, roughly 200 meters northeast of your barn. Rodriguez's finger traced a red circle on the image. Objects consistent in size and density with sealed containers. Currency, precious metals, documents. The leather pouch beneath Miguel's bedroom floorboard seemed to burn in his mind's eye. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay photographs that could destroy presidencies and bank records that mapped corruption through Colombia's highest echelons. He'd looked only once, that first terrifying night after the stranger vanished, and the faces staring back at him from those grainy images had made him understand why men killed to protect such secrets. He'd sealed the pouch away immediately, pretending it didn't exist. But late at night, when sleep eluded him and guilt gnawed at his conscience, Miguel would remember the stranger's fevered words, enough evidence to burn their whole corrupt system to the ground. "I know nothing about buried objects," Miguel repeated, though the words felt increasingly meaningless. Carmen's humming stopped abruptly. Through the window, Miguel saw her freeze, a wooden spoon suspended halfway to her mouth as she tested the sancocho simmering on their ancient stove. Even from this distance, he could read the concern in her posture, the way her shoulders tensed when she sensed danger to her family. 43 years of marriage had taught them to communicate without words. She knew something was terribly wrong. Agent Rodriguez closed the folder with deliberate slowness, the soft sound echoing like a gunshot in Miguel's ears. "We'll be back tomorrow morning with excavation equipment," he said. "I suggest you use tonight to refresh your memory about any arrangements you might have made 30 years ago." Miguel nodded, not trusting his voice. The agents turned to leave, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path his grandfather had laid stone by stone. He watched until their black SUV disappeared around the mountain curve, then stood frozen in his doorway for several minutes, listening to the familiar sounds of his farm, sounds that might be ripped away forever by morning. "Miguel?" Carmen's voice drifted from the kitchen, carefully modulated but carrying undertones only he could read. Who were those men? He couldn't answer yet. His legs felt unsteady, his chest tight with the weight of 30 years' worth of buried fear suddenly breaking free. Instead, he walked toward the barn, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't name. The old wooden structure looked exactly as it had that October night, weathered planks gray with age, heavy doors hanging slightly crooked on rusty hinges. But now it felt different, charged with the electricity of approaching doom. Miguel pushed open the doors, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and old wood and something else, something that might have been imagination or might have been the ghost of expensive cologne and blood. The secret compartment his grandfather had built during La Violencia was invisible unless you knew where to look, a section of the back wall that swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a space just large enough for a man to curl up and wait for death to pass by. How many times had his family hidden there? How many secrets had these walls absorbed? Miguel's phone buzzed in his pocket. The sound startled him so violently that he nearly stumbled. His ancient Nokia, a relic Carmen insisted they keep because the new phones were too complicated, showed an unknown number with a Bogotá area code. He almost didn't answer. Unknown numbers from the capital never brought good news to mountain farmers. But something made him press the green button. A low, silence stretched across the connection, broken only by the faint crackle of a distant line. Then, just as Miguel started to hang up, a voice emerged from the static. A voice that turned his blood to ice water. "The DEA found you." Miguel's hand began to shake so violently he nearly dropped the phone. The voice was older now, roughened by decades and cigarettes, but unmistakable. The same cultured accent, the same tone of absolute authority that had haunted his dreams for 30 years. Impossible, Miguel whispered. You're dead. They killed you in Medellin. I saw it on television. A dry laugh echoed through the phone speaker. Pablo Escobar died in Medellin, yes, but the man who bled in your barn, that's a different story altogether. Miguel's knees buckled. He caught himself against the barn wall, the rough wood scraping his palm. His mind reeled, rejecting what his ears had heard. Pablo Escobar was dead, shot on a rooftop by police in December 1993, 2 months after. Who are you? Miguel's voice came out as a croak. Does it matter? What matters is that they're going to dig up my insurance policy tomorrow morning. Photos of senators counting bribes, bank records showing payments to Supreme Court justices, evidence of connections that go all the way to the presidential palace. The voice paused, letting the implications sink in. Evidence that certain people have killed for. Evidence that will get your granddaughter's throat cut if it sees daylight. Sophia's face flashed before Miguel's eyes, her trusting smile, her dreams of medical school, her whole beautiful life stretching ahead like an unopened book. What do you want? Tonight, after your family sleeps, go to the coordinates I gave you 30 years ago. Dig up the containers. Take only the documents in the red folder marked Seguros, insurance. Burn everything else. Bury the gold again. When the DEA digs tomorrow, they'll find treasure but no evidence. Everyone wins. And if I refuse, the silence that followed was more terrifying than any threat could have been. When the voice spoke again, it carried the casual menace of a man who had ordered thousands of deaths with the same emotion he might use to order coffee. Your granddaughter walks to school alone every morning. Same path through the coffee grove, same time each day. Creatures of habit are so vulnerable. The line went dead. Miguel stared at the phone's dark screen, his reflection distorted in the scratched plastic surface. Around him, the barn suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in like the sides of a tomb. 30 years of silence, 30 years of pretending that October night had been the end of the nightmare. But nightmares, he now understood, never truly end. They just wait in the darkness, growing stronger, until they're ready to devour everything you love. Miguel stumbled from the barn into the dying light, his legs moving without conscious direction. The phone felt like a block of ice in his trembling hand. Dead men don't make phone calls. The thought circled through his mind like a vulture, refusing to land on anything resembling logic. He found himself at the kitchen door, staring through the screen at Carmen stirring her sancocho. The normalcy of the scene, his wife of 43 years humming softly, steam rising from the pot, the familiar dance of her movements around their modest kitchen, felt like a cruel joke. How could the world look exactly the same when everything had just shattered? Miguel? Carmen looked up, wooden spoon suspended mid-stir, her weathered face creased with immediate concern. Dios mío, you look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have. The men. They were government agents. DEA. Carmen's spoon clattered to the floor. In all their years together, through droughts and failed harvests, through Isabella's teenage rebellions and the grinding poverty that had shadowed their lives like a persistent cough, Miguel had never seen that particular expression cross his wife's face. Pure crystalline terror. What do they want with us? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Miguel opened his mouth, then closed it again. How could he explain that their simple life had been built on a foundation of buried secrets, that every peaceful morning for 30 years had been borrowed time? They think someone hid things on our property. Long ago. Carmen's dark eyes searched his face with the precision of a woman who had spent decades reading his moods, his fears, his carefully constructed silences. What kind of things? Before Miguel could answer, Sophia burst through the back door, her school uniform rumpled and her cheeks flushed from running. Abuela, I finished my mathematics homework. Can we practice my English now? The sight of his granddaughter, so alive, so trusting, so blissfully unaware of the shadows closing around them, made Miguel's chest constrict with protective fury. Your granddaughter walks to school alone every morning. The stranger's words echoed like a death sentence. Of course, mija, Carmen managed, her voice artificially bright. "But first, help me set the table. Your abuela looks tired." Sophia's intelligent eyes shifted between her grandparents, that familiar wariness creeping across her features. Children in these mountains learned to read danger in adult faces the way city children learned to read traffic lights. "Are you sick, abuelo?" "Just tired, pequeña." Miguel forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "Go help your grandmother." As Sophia moved toward the kitchen cabinets, Miguel caught Carmen's arm. "I need to check the cattle," he murmured. "I'll be back for dinner." Carmen's grip on his wrist was surprisingly strong. "Miguel Vargas, don't you dare walk away from me right now. Whatever's happening." "Mañana," he said, gently extracting his arm. "We'll talk tomorrow." But even as he said it, Miguel wondered if there would be a tomorrow, not the kind they'd known anyway. He walked toward the pasture where their 6 remaining cattle grazed, but his real destination lay beyond, a grove of ancient coffee plants that marked the northeastern boundary of their property. With each step, the coordinates burned brighter in his memory, numbers whispered by a dying man 30 years ago, numbers Miguel had tried desperately to forget. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine and wood smoke from distant kitchens. Somewhere in the valley below, a radio played vallenato music, the accordion's voice drifting up through the gathering darkness. It was the Colombia he loved, peaceful, timeless, innocent of the violence that had shaped so much of their history. Miguel's Nokia buzzed again. This time the number belonged to his old friend Carlos, whose farm bordered his to the south. "Carlos?" "Miguel." His friend's voice was strained, urgent. "I just had visitors, men in expensive suits asking questions about you, about October 1993. Miguel's blood chilled. "What kind of questions?" "They wanted to know if I remembered anything strange from that time. If I saw vehicles coming to your farm at night. If you ever mentioned having visitors." Carlos paused. "Miguel, I've known you for 40 years. I've never seen you afraid of anything. But these men, they scared me, and I think you should know, they weren't alone." "What do you mean?" "After they left, I saw them talking to others. Maria from the market, Father Rodriguez from the church, the postman. They're asking everyone about you, hermano. Everyone." The phone slipped in Miguel's sweaty palm. The net was tightening, just as it had 30 years ago when helicopters circled these same mountains and soldiers searched every barn, every cave, every possible hiding place. But this time, they weren't looking for a man. They were looking for the truth he'd buried. "Carlos," Miguel whispered, "if anything happens to me..." The line went dead. Miguel stared at the dark screen, remembering another October evening when the stranger's fevered words had painted pictures of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. Pictures that powerful people would kill to keep buried. He was no longer just a poor farmer facing foreclosure. He was a walking death sentence.